He started with a letter, a thick cream-colored envelope tucked into my mailbox, its seal pressed too firmly, as if someone wanted me to feel the weight of the message before I even opened it. I remember standing on the driveway, the air sharp with the smell of cut grass and hot asphalt, as my hands tore through the paper. Inside was a notice so outrageous that at first I thought it had to be a mistake. The Homeowners Association had fined me, not once, not twice, but over and over again until the amount printed at the bottom of the page looked like a ransom. $250,000. The words didn't even feel real. They stung in my chest, echoing in my skull, as though the HOA had decided to squeeze the life out of me simply because they could. I read the letter again, each line more absurd than the last. Violations for a cracked driveway, fines for a shed that had been standing long before most of the board members had even moved in, penalties for unauthorized landscaping on land that had belonged to my family for generations. My hands trembled as I folded the notice, but it wasn't fear that gripped me, it was something darker. A growing fire, pressure in my chest, a sense that I was being pushed into a corner where I didn't belong. And in that moment, standing under the heavy sun, I realized this wasn't just about rules, this was war. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of threats and intimidation. Every time I walked outside, I felt their eyes on me. A neighbor would pause mid-step to watch. A board member's car would slow as it passed my home, windows cracked just enough to suggest I was being studied. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to believe that their power was absolute. But I couldn't shake the memory of my grandfather's voice, deep and steady, reminding me that the land we stood on was more than soil, it was legacy. He had said once, never let anyone take what you built, even if they come dressed as neighbors. When the second letter came, the number had grown. Interest, fees, threats of legal action. My kitchen table filled with envelopes, all stamped with the HOA's logo, each one bolder than the last, as though daring me to fight back. At night, the house felt colder, like the walls themselves were tightening, whispering that I was alone against something larger than I could handle. But even then, in the silence, I felt a pull toward the old cabinet in the back room, the one my grandfather had sealed shut decades ago. The cabinet was heavy, carved oak darkened by years of dust, and for most of my life it had been just a piece of furniture. But now, as I stared at it, something in me shifted. The HOA thought they had me cornered, but they didn't know what I kept hidden. They didn't know the truth that was waiting in that cabinet, wrapped in yellowing deeds, faded maps, and signatures inked long before their association had even existed. I hadn't opened it in years, but the fines had awakened something primal in me. They thought I was just another homeowner under their thumb. They thought their rules were iron, but they had made one mistake, pushing me far enough to look back into the past. And in the past, there were answers. There was power. There was proof. As my fingers brushed against the cold metal handle, I knew this fight had already shifted. They wanted to strip me of everything, to bury me under paper and threats. But they had no idea that with one pull of that cabinet door, I could unravel their entire empire. The cabinet groaned as I pulled it open, dust swirling into the air like secrets set free after decades of silence. Inside were boxes, each marked with dates in my grandfather's careful handwriting. The smell of old paper and ink filled the room, sharp and almost metallic, and as I sifted through the brittle documents, my heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, only that I'd know it when I saw it. The first box was filled with photographs, black and white portraits of faces that looked like mine, standing proudly in front of land that stretched farther than the eye could see. Fields, roads, even what now stood as neatly paved sidewalks and cookie-cutter homes, all once part of my family's holdings. Beneath the photos were deeds. Hundreds of them, their ink faded but still legible, stamped with seals of county clerks long dead. Each page told a story of ownership passed from one generation to the next, binding us to the ground beneath our feet. I ran my fingers across the parchment, the weight of it grounding me, reminding me that I wasn't just some man they could bully into submission. No, I was the blood and bone of this place, tied to it in ways the HOA couldn't begin to comprehend. But outside my windows, their campaign grew louder. Notices taped to my door, neighbors whispering that I was unstable. A board member's wife sneered as I walked past, her voice carrying just enough for me to hear. Some people think the rules don't apply to them. They wanted to isolate me, to paint me as the villain, while quietly bleeding me dry. One evening, as the sun bled red across the horizon, a knock rattled my door. It was Darren, the HOA president, dressed in his usual pressed polo and smug smile. He didn't wait to be invited in, he just stepped across the threshold like he owned the place. His eyes swept the room, lingering on the stacks of envelopes scattered across my table. "You're in deep, friend," he said, his voice coated in false concern. "But there's a way out. Pay what you owe, and we'll make this disappear." I studied him, the way his lips curled as he spoke, the glint of satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he'd won. He thought I was desperate enough to bend. My jaw tightened, but I kept my voice even. "You're mistaken, Darren. You don't hold the cards here." He laughed, short and cruel. "You think an old shed and a broken driveway make you untouchable. We own this neighborhood. We make the rules. And if you fight us, you'll lose everything." The words settled like poison in the air. For a moment, I almost let his confidence unnerve me. But then I thought of the documents in the other room, the ones he had no idea existed. I leaned closer, meeting his stare. "Be careful, Darren. Sometimes the land beneath your feet isn't yours to claim." His smirk faltered just slightly before he turned and left, slamming the door behind him. That night, I spread the deeds across my table, arranging them like pieces of a puzzle. The dates stretched back over a century, each one reaffirming what I already suspected. The HOA wasn't standing on authority. They were standing on my family's soil. They were trespassers, building their empire on borrowed ground. But proving it wouldn't be easy. They had lawyers, they had influence, they had the power to turn an entire neighborhood against me. I knew the moment I revealed my hand, they'd come for me harder than ever before. I needed to be ready. I needed more than proof, I needed strategy. So I stayed up into the early hours, cataloging every document, scanning maps that showed the land's original boundaries. With every paper I touched, the fire inside me grew. They thought they could find me into submission, bury me under numbers, but they hadn't counted on the truth. They hadn't counted on me. And as dawn broke, painting my walls gold, I realized the game had changed. I wasn't the one backed into a corner anymore. They were. They just didn't know it yet. The morning after my long night with the deeds, I stepped outside to find a bright red notice nailed to my fence. The word foreclosure screamed across the page in bold black letters. My stomach twisted, but not from fear, it was fury. They were accelerating their game, moving faster, tightening their grip in hopes I'd break before I had the chance to fight back. Neighbors passed by with sideways glances, their expressions a mixture of pity and disdain. Whispers carried across the street. "He's done for the HOA, always wins." But what they didn't realize was that every move the association made only fueled me more. I pulled the notice from the wood, folded it slowly, and slipped it into my jacket like it was nothing but kindling for the fire I was building. That afternoon, I received a knock louder than before. When I opened the door, two men in suits stood there, clipboards in hand, their expressions flat, rehearsed. "Mr. Carver," one of them said, "we've been authorized by the HOA to perform an inspection. You're required to let us in." Their arrogance was suffocating. I stepped outside, closing the door firmly behind me. "No one inspects my home without a warrant," I said evenly. They exchanged glances, smirks tugging at their lips. "If you refuse to comply, the fines will increase. The board is prepared to escalate." I leaned forward, lowering my voice so only they could hear. "Escalate all you want, but let me warn you, when this is over, it won't be me standing in front of a judge." The suits left with practiced calm, but I could feel their frustration. The HOA wasn't used to resistance. They were used to homeowners trembling, begging, paying whatever it took to make the harassment stop. But I wasn't begging, I was building. That night, I gathered the most critical documents, land deeds, county filings, boundary maps, and placed them into a locked briefcase. I planned my next steps carefully. First, a visit to the county records office to verify every signature and seal. Second, a consultation with a lawyer my grandfather had once trusted, a man known for his tenacity in land disputes. And third, patience, because revealing my hand too soon would ruin everything. But as I prepared, the HOA escalated again. A week later, I came home to find my driveway blocked by a tow truck, chains rattling as they hooked onto my old pickup. A board member stood nearby, smirking as if this was his personal victory. "This vehicle is in violation," he called out. "Unregistered, unsightly, lowering property values. We're towing it at your expense." I strode forward, my pulse hammering. "Unhook it," I ordered. The tow driver hesitated, looking between me and the board member. "Sir, I'm just following orders." "Unhook it," I repeated, my voice cutting like steel. Then I pulled a folder from under my arm and flipped it open, showing a deed stamped in bold ink. "You see this isn't your land. This isn't the HOA's land. This entire street sits on property my family has owned since before any of you ever dreamed of moving here. You want to take my truck, then you'll explain to the county sheriff why you're trespassing on private property." The board member's smirk faltered. The tow driver blinked, uncertain, then slowly lowered the chains. The truck settled back onto the pavement, untouched. I didn't miss the way the board member's jaw tightened, or the way his phone lit up as he typed furiously, no doubt summoning reinforcements. They were realizing, piece by piece, that I wasn't the easy target they believed me to be. But I also knew this was just the beginning. The HOA wouldn't stop until they broke me, or until I broke them. As I stood in the quiet street, clutching the deed, I thought of my grandfather again. His words echoed in my mind, steady and unyielding. The land doesn't lie. Paper may fade, but the soil remembers who it belongs to. And now, so would they. The night after the tow truck incident, the neighborhood shifted. The air felt heavier, colder, like the HOA had issued silent marching orders to every resident. Where once neighbors waved politely, now they averted their eyes. Curtains twitched as I walked by, whispers slithered just out of earshot. Even children playing on the sidewalk stopped mid-laugh, pulled inside by anxious parents. It was as if I'd been marked, an enemy of their quiet little empire. The intimidation wasn't subtle. One morning I woke to find my mailbox ripped off its post, bolts dangling like broken teeth. A smear of spray paint stretched across my garage. Pay up or get out. That same evening, a rock shattered my kitchen window, scattering glass across the floor. I crouched in the dark, heart pounding, gripping the old baseball bat I kept by the door. But when I stepped outside, there was only silence, the distant hum of crickets, and the eerie sense that I was being watched. The board was tightening the noose. Darren, their polished, smug president, even went so far as to hold a community meeting in the park across the street. Through my blinds, I could see him standing tall, gesturing toward my home, his words carrying just enough for me to catch fragments. Dangerous, unstable, destroying property values. The crowd nodded, muttered, rallied behind him. He was turning them one by one against me. But what Darren didn't know was that I wasn't sitting idle. Each night, under the dim light of my desk lamp, I built my arsenal of truth. The county clerk had confirmed every deed, every boundary, every signature. The land was mine, and not just the patch under my house, the entire subdivision. The streets, the sidewalks, even the manicured lawns they guarded so fiercely, all traced back to my family's holdings. The HOA wasn't enforcing rules on me. They were parasites living off ground they never had the right to claim. Still, timing mattered. If I revealed my cards too soon, they'd find a way to spin it, bury me under countersuits and confusion. I needed one undeniable moment, one strike that would echo so loudly they couldn't ignore it. That chance arrived sooner than I expected. Late one Friday evening, I found an official letter taped to my door. The HOA was initiating foreclosure proceedings. They claimed my unpaid fines justified seizing my home, auctioning it, and expelling me from the neighborhood entirely. The arrogance of it almost made me laugh. They weren't just harassing me anymore, they were declaring open war. I sat at my kitchen table, the letter spread before me, the shattered window patched with cardboard, my briefcase of deeds glowing like a beacon under the lamp's yellow light. My pulse steady, my fear receded. In its place was a calm, deliberate resolve. The next morning I dressed carefully, not in work clothes, not in something casual. I wore my grandfather's old suit, pressed in dark, the one he used when dealing with county officials decades ago. I carried the briefcase, heavy with history, and walked across the street to the park where the HOA board was holding their monthly meeting. Dozens of neighbors had gathered, their folding chairs set neatly in rows, Darren at the front with his gavel and his smirk. The chatter died as I approached, footsteps echoing on the pavement, the briefcase in my hand like a loaded weapon. "You're not welcome here," Darren said loudly, projecting his voice for the crowd. "This meeting is for homeowners in good standing. You're nothing but a delinquent." I stopped in the center of the group, my voice calm but carrying. "You want to talk about standing, Darren? Let's talk about who's really standing on whose land." A ripple of unease spread through the crowd. Darren chuckled, shaking his head. "More nonsense. You've lost, Carver. Pay your dues or pack your things." I placed the briefcase on a picnic table, clicked it open, and pulled out the first deed. I held it high, the sun glinting off the embossed seal. "This is the original land grant, dated 1902, passed down to my grandfather, then to my father, and now to me. Every square inch of this neighborhood, every road, every sidewalk, belongs to my family. The HOA has no authority here because you've been trespassing on my land since the day you arrived." Gasps tore through the crowd. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes darting between me and the paper in my hand. Darren's smirk cracked just slightly, before he masked it with forced laughter. "Forgery," he spat. "Old paper doesn't change the law. You think you can scare us with fairy tales." I laid more documents on the table, each one stamped and notarized, each one a dagger aimed at their false throne. "This isn't a fairy tale, Darren. This is fact, verified by the county clerk. And if you push this any further, it won't be my name in the courthouse, it'll be yours, explaining why your entire association has been collecting illegal fees on property that was never theirs." The silence that followed was electric, heavy, unbroken. For the first time, I saw doubt in the eyes of the crowd, and in that silence I knew the war had shifted. The park meeting shattered the illusion of their control. For days afterward, the neighborhood buzzed like a hive kicked open. Some residents avoided me entirely, slipping indoors when I walked past. Others eyed me with curiosity, whispering to one another about the papers they'd seen glinting in the sunlight. And Darren, the proud president, walked the streets with tighter shoulders, his usual smugness slipping into something colder, sharper. I knew he wouldn't take the blow quietly. Men like Darren never did. It began with the mail, not the HOA letters. They still poured in, each one more desperate, more aggressive, but anonymous notes scrawled in angry handwriting. Liar, fraud, leave before it gets worse. One envelope held nothing but ash, a smear of black powder that stained my hands. I didn't need to wonder who sent them. Then came the lawyers. Thick packets of legal jargon began landing on my doorstep, delivered not through the post, but by messengers who smirked as they handed them over. They accused me of falsifying documents, of attempting to undermine the legal authority of a registered homeowners association. Each accusation was bolder, more desperate than the last. It was clear Darren had rallied his forces, pulling every string he had to drown me under paperwork. But what he didn't know was that I wasn't fighting alone anymore. My grandfather's old attorney, Mr. Harlan, a man with silver hair and a voice like gravel, had agreed to take my case. When I laid the deeds on his desk, he didn't laugh or shake his head. He leaned forward, adjusted his glasses, and nodded. "They've walked into a storm," he said, "and they don't even see it coming." Still, the HOA played dirty. They plastered flyers across the neighborhood, warning residents that I was a danger to community stability. They circulated emails claiming I was mentally unwell, a recluse with fantasies of grandeur. My phone buzzed late at night with blocked numbers, voices whispering threats before hanging up. One night, I found tire tracks across my lawn, deep ruts carved into the earth. They wanted me rattled, they wanted me isolated, but every attack only hardened my resolve. The tipping point came during another board meeting, held in the HOA's office, a building ironically standing on the very plot my deeds claimed. Harlan and I walked in together, briefcase in hand, while the board members sat like vultures in pressed shirts and forced smiles. Darren leaned back in his chair, feigning calm, though his tapping fingers betrayed him. "You've wasted enough of our time," he said flatly. "We're filing for immediate foreclosure. You'll be out within the month." Harlan's chuckle was low, dangerous. He slid a stack of papers across the table. "This," he said, "is a formal cease and desist. Any further attempt to seize my client's property will result in charges of fraud, extortion, and illegal collection of fees. Every dollar you've taken from every resident here is subject to repayment, with interest." The room fell into stunned silence. Darren's face flushed, but his pride wouldn't let him back down. "You think a dusty old deed can undo decades of law? The HOA is recognized by the county. We are the authority here." Harlan's eyes gleamed. "Recognized by mistake, because the land you claim to govern never belonged to you. The county records prove it, and once a judge sees this, your association will be dismantled piece by piece." For the first time, Darren's mask cracked. His lips pressed thin, his eyes darted toward the other board members, searching for support. But they looked uneasy, shifting in their seats, suddenly unsure if the empire they'd built was about to crumble. As we left the meeting, the weight of their stares burning into our backs, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The battle wasn't won, not yet. Darren would double down, drag this fight into the courts, into the mud. But the truth was mine. The soil beneath their polished shoes was mine. And deep down, they knew it. That night, as I stood at my window, the neighborhood quiet under the silver glow of the moon, I realized the storm had reached its peak. They could smear me, threaten me, drag me through legal hell. But with every desperate move, they revealed their fear. The HOA had always thrived on control, on convincing homeowners they were powerless. But now, the board was staring into the abyss of their own undoing. And I was the one holding the match. The legal war began like a drumbeat in the distance, low, steady, but growing louder with every passing day. Court notices piled on my doorstep, each stamped with official seals meant to intimidate. Darren and his board filed motion after motion, claiming my deeds were forgeries, that the land transfers were invalid, that I was delusional. Their lawyers, sleek men in polished suits, paraded through the courthouse with smirks, certain the weight of their reputation alone could crush me. But they underestimated Harlan. My grandfather's attorney might have been old, but he was sharp, a predator who smelled weakness the way a wolf senses fear. Every filing they lobbed at us, he countered with precision, citing obscure precedents, unearthing county codes the HOA had ignored for years. He moved through the courtroom with the quiet confidence of a man who'd seen empires fall before and was about to watch another crumble. The neighborhood, meanwhile, began to fracture. On one side were the loyalists, neighbors who clung to the HOA like it was their lifeline. convinced that without Darren's iron grip, property values would plummet and chaos would reign. They whispered about me at block parties, painted me as a dangerous, eccentric determined to tear down the community. But others, those who had suffered fines for leaving trash cans out too long, who'd been forced to repaint shutters or cut down trees, began to see me differently. For the first time, they questioned whether the HOA had ever had the right to rule them at all. Some even slipped me notes of quiet encouragement. "We're with you. They've bullied us too." One afternoon, I returned home to find a basket on my porch. Fresh bread, a small note tucked inside. "Thank you for standing up to them." It wasn't signed, but it didn't need to be. The tide was shifting. Darren, of course, sensed it too. His tactics grew darker. Late-night knocks on my door, shadows moving across my lawn. My phone rang at odd hours, silence on the other end. A neighbor swore they saw Darren meeting with contractors near the edge of the subdivision, pointing at boundary markers like he was preparing to redraw the map himself. Then came the smear campaign. Flyers appeared in mailboxes, accusing me of tax evasion, criminal fraud, even hinting at violence. The words were venom designed to rot my reputation, to turn hesitation into hostility. Some neighbors recoiled again, pulling their children close when I passed. Others, though, saw through the lies. The division deepened, the cracks spreading through the neighborhood like fractures in glass. And all the while I prepared. Harlan and I built a case brick by brick, each deed verified, each signature authenticated by experts. Maps were redrawn, boundaries confirmed, the chain of ownership made unbreakable. Every page was another nail in the coffin of the HOA. The first hearing arrived on a gray morning. The courtroom was packed, neighbors on one side, HOA loyalists on the other. Darren sat at the front, jaw clenched, whispering furiously to his lawyers. I walked in with Harlan, the briefcase in his hand, my heart steady. When the judge entered, the air thickened with anticipation. Darren's lawyers spoke first, their words slick, polished, but hollow. They painted me as a liar clinging to dusty papers, a man desperate to escape responsibility. Darren sat back, arms crossed, certain the performance would sway the room. Then Harlan rose. His voice was gravel and steel as he laid the deeds on the bench, one after another, the seals glinting under the fluorescent lights. He spoke of lineage, of history, of boundaries etched into law long before Darren's HOA even existed. He turned their arrogance into fuel, dismantling their arguments with quiet precision until the board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The judge said little, only that more review was required, more hearings scheduled. But as we left the courthouse, I saw it, the flicker of doubt in Darren's eyes. The certainty that had carried him for years was eroding, grain by grain. That night I stood again at my window, the briefcase on the table behind me, the neighborhood cloaked in silence. I thought of my grandfather, of his voice reminding me never to yield what was ours, and I realized the battle was no longer just mine. It was every homeowner who had suffered under their thumb, every neighbor too afraid to speak. The storm wasn't ending, it was only beginning. The second hearing was different. The first had been a sparring match, a test of wills. But now the air inside the courtroom crackled with tension, as if everyone could sense the cracks widening in the HOA's armor. The benches were packed again, residents pressed shoulder to shoulder, their whispers rising and falling like waves before a storm. Darren entered with his usual swagger, but I noticed the stiffness in his stride, the faint sheen of sweat along his brow. His board trailed behind him, less confident than before, their eyes darting nervously around the room. They knew the tide was turning, but they were chained to him, their reputations tied to his crumbling empire. When the proceedings began, Darren's lawyers struck first, pushing stacks of documents onto the judge's bench, claiming they had new evidence of my supposed fraud. They waved photocopies of maps, grainy black and white scans riddled with inconsistencies. Their voices dripped with indignation, as though my very presence insulted the order of the community. But then Harlan rose, unhurried, deliberate. He carried with him a single rolled map, the parchment yellowed, its edges fragile with age. He spread it carefully across the judge's bench. The room fell silent. The map wasn't just paper, it was history. Boundaries sketched in ink more than a century ago, the same boundaries recorded and confirmed in every legal record since. He placed the original deeds alongside it, each embossed seal a hammer striking the coffin of their authority. The judge leaned forward, eyes scanning the evidence. Darren's jaw tightened. His lawyers scrambled, whispering urgently, flipping through their papers, but their arguments crumbled under the weight of authenticity. When the session adjourned, the room erupted. Neighbors murmured, some in disbelief, others in quiet triumph. One man stood and shouted, "We've been paying them for nothing." His voice carried, igniting a ripple of outrage. Darren stormed from the room, his face pale, his composure shattered. But the battle didn't end there. That night, as I returned home, the harassment escalated to a fever pitch. My garage door was spray-painted again, this time with the word thief in dripping red letters. Rocks clattered against my windows, the glass rattling but holding. I heard engines revving down the street, tires screeching, laughter fading into the night. They were desperate now, their power slipping through their fingers, and desperation made them reckless. Inside, I sat at my table, the briefcase open, deeds and maps spread before me like a general surveying a battlefield. The noise outside was just static compared to the clarity I felt. Darren had overplayed his hand. His board was fracturing, neighbors were waking up, and the courts were listening. The time for defense was over. It was time to strike. Harlan agreed. Over coffee that week, he leaned forward, his gravelly voice steady. We've proven ownership, but to end this, we need to go further. We file not just for dismissal of their claims, but for dissolution of the HOA itself. Restitution for every illegal fine they've collected. Damages for harassment. If we win, their empire doesn't just fall, it vanishes. The thought settled in my chest like iron. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every neighbor forced to bend under their thumb, every family fined into submission. The HOA wasn't simply a nuisance, it was a parasite, and I was about to cut it out at the root. Word spread quickly. By the time the third hearing was announced, the neighborhood was a powder keg. Groups of residents met in hushed circles, some demanding accountability, others clinging desperately to Darren's crumbling promises. I watched it all from my porch, silent, knowing the final blow was coming. The night before the hearing, I received one last message. A single envelope slid under my door. Inside was a note scrawled in rushed handwriting. Stop this, walk away, or you won't live to see tomorrow. I read it once, twice, then fed it to the flames in my fireplace. The fire consumed it quickly, sparks crackling as the paper curled into ash. My hands were steady. The threat didn't scare me. It confirmed what I already knew. They were finished. And tomorrow, the entire neighborhood would finally see it. The courthouse was overflowing the morning of the final hearing. People crowded the steps, spilling onto the sidewalks, their voices buzzing with anticipation. News vans lined the street, cameras perched like vultures waiting to capture the downfall of a once powerful board. Inside, the air was electric, charged with the weight of what was about to unfold. I walked in with Harlan at my side, the briefcase in his grip. My heartbeat was steady, each step deliberate. Across the aisle, Darren sat stiffly, his suit immaculate but his face drawn, pale. His board members whispered nervously, their unity fractured, some avoiding his gaze entirely. The empire he had built on intimidation and arrogance was trembling on its foundation. The judge called the room to order. Darren's lawyers launched into their argument, louder than ever, voices strained with desperation. They painted me as a fraud, claimed my deeds were forged, my evidence fabricated. Their words rang hollow, echoes of a fight they already knew was slipping away. Then Harlan rose, calm, deliberate. He laid the final deed on the bench, followed by certified documents from the county clerk. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady and unyielding. These papers confirm, beyond any doubt, that my client is the sole legal owner of the land on which this subdivision stands. The HOA has operated illegally, collecting fees and levying fines on property that was never theirs to govern. We are petitioning for the immediate dissolution of the association, full restitution to every homeowner, and damages for years of harassment. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Neighbors leaned forward, eyes wide, mouths agape. One woman muttered, "We've been paying them for nothing." Another stood up, shaking his head in disbelief. The judge banged the gavel, restoring order, but the shock had already spread like wildfire. Darren's face reddened, his composure crumbling. "This is outrageous," he shouted, standing abruptly. "This man is nothing but a liar, a con artist. You can't erase decades of law with a few scraps of paper." The judge's voice cut through the noise, calm but firm. "Mr. Carver's documentation has been verified by the county. Your association has no legal authority over this land. Effective immediately, all proceedings against him are dismissed. The matter of restitution will move forward in due course." The gavel struck, final, absolute. The room erupted. Neighbors shouted, some in rage at Darren, others in relief, their voices colliding in a storm of disbelief and fury. Reporters scrambled for quotes, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. But I stood still, breathing deeply, the weight of years lifting from my shoulders. For the first time, I wasn't just defending myself, I had won. Darren stumbled toward me, his eyes wild, his voice a hiss meant only for my ears. "You think this is over? You've destroyed everything. Do you understand what you've done?" I met his gaze, steady and calm. "No, Darren, I didn't destroy anything. You did, when you built your kingdom on land that was never yours." He froze, his mouth opening, closing, but no words came. Then he turned and stormed out, his board scrambling after him, their empire in ruins. Outside, the crowd parted as I stepped onto the courthouse steps. Some neighbors approached cautiously, their faces torn between shame and gratitude. An older man extended his hand, voice trembling. We didn't know. Thank you for standing up to them." Others nodded, murmuring agreement, their fear of the HOA finally broken. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I walked my neighborhood. For the first time in months, no one avoided my gaze. Children played freely on the sidewalks, their laughter untainted by whispered warnings. The weight of intimidation had lifted, replaced by something fragile but real: hope. Back home, I placed the deeds carefully into the cabinet where they had slept for decades. My grandfather's voice echoed in my memory, steady and certain. Never let anyone take what you built, even if they come dressed as neighbors. The HOA had tried to bury me under fines, threats, and lies. They had tried to strip me of dignity, to turn my own community against me. But in the end, the land remembered, the truth remembered. And now, so would they. The neighborhood was mine again, not through fear, not through power, but through the undeniable weight of history. Their empire was dust, their reign ended, their threats silenced. I closed the cabinet, the latch clicking shut, and exhaled. The war was over. And I had won.